Welcome to Coffee with Catholic Workers, a podcast made by and for Catholic workers. I'm Theo.
And I'm Lydia. We've both been a part of the Catholic Worker for the last decade, and we're excited to bring you conversations with Catholic workers from around the world.
Today we have Tensie Hernandez joining us from Beatitude House of Guadalupe, California. She shares with us the story of stumbling onto the Los Angeles Catholic Worker while still in high school, how rootedness in a community grows over time, and how running a Catholic worker in a small town is different than doing so in a big bustling city.
Now, here's Tensie.
Well, Tensie, thanks so much for being willing to talk with us. Usually we start episodes off by asking folks, how did you come to the Catholic worker movement, and what did your Catholic worker journey look like that eventually you wound up there on the central coast of California?
Right. So my particular journey started when I was young. I was 18 and still in high school, and really searching for my place in the Catholic Church and beyond the Catholic Church, just what was mine to do in life, given the things that I was reading about. And I, of course, had gone to school at Catholic school all my life, all girls Catholic high school. And it was in senior year that we were introduced to, of course, Mother Teresa and St. Francis and sort of the big names, never introduced to Dorothy Day. And I was really fired up with feeling like I needed to live my faith. And consequently, I thought to, on Good Friday, with the leftover bread that we had at the school to celebrate the Holy Thursday Eucharist, I thought we should pass out that bread to the homeless on Skid Row on Good Friday. So very naively took a friend with me and literally was thinking of passing out bread on Skid Row on Good Friday. And we happened to turn on one of the exits of downtown, and we made a left, and at this building, didn't know what the building was, there was this huge banner that says, "Today Jesus is crucified in Central America." And so this would be in 1986. Didn't even know much of what that meant, but I saw that there were priests and nuns there, and I thought it must be Catholic. Why don't we just go check it out? And ended up participating in what was the Good Friday Stations of the Cross, and just sort of wowed by the experience. And again, not being at all political, just felt like, God, this is something authentic and true. And was standing there as people sort of were folding up banners. And then I see this van sort of swoop in, and I see this group of people kind of go into the van and they drive away. And I have no idea what just happened. And this homeless guy comes up to me and he says, "I've never seen you before. Are you new to the Catholic Worker?" And I didn't even know what that meant, but he was homeless looking. And I thought, oh, good, we can give him some bread. And so he says, "Oh, you don't know? Oh, you have to come to the kitchen and you have to meet Julie." And anyways, sort of long story short, we ended up going to the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen and meeting Julia, who's now a long-term Catholic worker, who was there preparing the meal for the homeless men that were staying there at the Catholic Worker on the top floor of the kitchen at the time. And I literally could not believe what I was experiencing. I sort of thought like, oh my God, this is this is exactly what Jesus would be doing. And so then she invited me to participate in the summer program. I had been praying and praying for a sign for something to indicate what I needed to do that summer, and there it was. And so I participated in the first LA Catholic Worker Summer Program. And to me, it felt like it was the absolute closest thing to anything I could imagine Jesus doing if he were alive today. And I was completely bit, and so lived the experience of the summer program, but had already applied for and been accepted into university. And so I went to my first semester of university and I hated it. And I just thought, like, these are very, very important years in my life, and whatever I do and whoever I'm with are going to shape me, and who do I want and need to shape me. And having had that experience in the summer, I realized that the Catholic Worker would be the one. And so I left university and then came back to the LA Worker and was there for the next 4 years, and really, really molded by and really taught by not only the ideas of the Catholic Worker, but was really, for me, it was the enfleshing of those ideas, and the seeing the real concreteness of what it meant to be a disciple of Christ in today's world. So I did that for 4.5 years, and then I left for a while because I sort of needed, in those years, Catholic Worker was my only identity, and I sort of needed to see myself as, what is mine and what is Catholic Worker, and I needed to sort of delineate that. So I spent a year in a monastery, and it was a profound experience because all of the ideas and the thoughts that I had not been able to process in the very busy life of Catholic Worker was now being able to sort of just deepen for me in that year away. And so when I left the monastery, I sort of felt like I wasn't ready to go back to the Catholic Worker, and instead I ended up working as a lay chaplain at the county hospital in Los Angeles. And it's there where I met Dennis, who would then become my husband. And as our friendship was sort of growing and deepening, we realized that there was a real sort of hunger and longing to live the Catholic Worker life, but to do it as a couple. We didn't feel so drawn to being in a huge city. And through sort of a series of networking and friends and so forth, we ended up coming together to a very small town in Central Coast, California, called Guadalupe. And it's where we've been for the last 27 years. So we are a certain kind of unique Catholic Worker because we're not in a big city. The town is only, I think it's about 8,000 now population, but it is a farm working community. And we wanted to be in a small community, in a small rural community where we could do and live and practice the acts of mercy in a context that wasn't sort of that inner city hustle and bustle and all of that we were really wanting to certainly felt gratitude for, all the inner city experiences that we had had. But at that point, we were feeling like we wanted to see if we could try to do something in a smaller community.
And so what does that look like for you all there in living out these works of mercy in Guadalupe?
Yeah. So Guadalupe, first of all, the Virgen of Guadalupe has just all of my life meant so much to me. And so to be in a community that has her name was just awesome for me. And to be with migrant farm workers has been an incredible journey. So just a little bit of background. My own family comes from Cuba, and I was born here, but my siblings all were born in Cuba. And so the experience of being a migrant is very, very close to me and very near to me, and came with all of the baggage that comes with migration, the sort of reinventing yourself in a new country. My mother learned English. My father never did. Really living very simply, for most of my childhood. And, just that sort of aspiration that comes with being an immigrant family, and your parents have so much hope and desire for your well-being and, education. Greatly impactful in my life, trying to navigate, sort of living in a bicultural reality, being in my family, speaking and eating and all things Cuban at home, but then being in a more sort of white culture existence in my day-to-day. So working through the bicultural realities and really identifying with people who were new migrants. And so that would be certainly a lot of the people that I was with in LA, but then having come to Guadalupe, realizing that this influx of families coming in, and them trying to navigate what it means to live in this country, and just having a real hope to be a bridge, So when we arrived, we didn't intentionally want to start a Catholic worker. We wanted instead to sort of live in the community and just see what the needs were. But there happened to be, there's only 2 Victorian houses in Guadalupe, and one of them happened to be empty. And we realized that it was empty, and we looked at it and thought, God, this would be a perfect Catholic worker house. So sort of we started searching and looking and seeing who owned the house. Well, we called the owners to see if they would rent to us, but we had no credit history, and we only had literally $300 in our pocket. And we thought, like, clearly they're never going to want to rent to us. And they said, well, let's just meet. And just a side story, I was like steady telling Dennis, let's just not go. They're going to like completely laugh us out of like Guadalupe, and they're going to think like we're ridiculous. And Dennis was like, no, we really should just give it a shot. They showed up with the only bumper sticker that I had seen in this area before, during, and since. I've never seen a bumper sticker that says "No Uvas," which is the United Farm Worker bumper sticker. And their car had that on it, and I just couldn't believe it. And so they sort of started showing us the house, and we're looking at it really close, and we're saying, like, oh, this is like too perfect. They're never going to want to let us live here. It ended up that they knew friends of ours from LA who were friends of the Catholic worker priests and so forth. And so when we sort of shared these mutual credentials, they said, you know, we'd be happy to rent it to you. We understand what you want to do. We can't let you be here for free, but like, could you afford $400 a month? And at the time we couldn't, because we literally only had $300, but we called Catherine and Jeff and we said, look, we want to start this Catholic worker house here in Guadalupe. This is the rent. Could you help us out? And they did. And they helped us out with rent for 1 year. And we were so grateful. And in that year, we were able to make enough contacts to then create our own sort of support, local support, so that we could pay the rent and then continue on with our Catholic worker house and have for the next 27 years. So it almost seems that for us, it really is like this sort of experiment in living on the grace of God, you know, just when we absolutely didn't know where, how, when, with whom, and just each time the door has been opened again and again.
Wow, that's all pretty amazing. So what do the works of mercy and just the general Catholic work look like day to day nowadays around Guadalupe?
Right. So when we came, like we were almost like the Mormons, because we didn't even have like enough money to like drive around. So we just literally walk around or ride our bikes around and just talk to people, and just people that we ran into. And you know, Guadalupe, because it's such a small community, like you have really, really friendly people and people who were just curious about who we were and what we were wanting to do. And so we just started asking, like, what are the needs? And, you know, at the time there were lots of different, you know, ideas popping up. But one of the things was that, like, the traditional soup kitchen wasn't necessarily a need there, because each sort of group of people we ran into had their own little humble kitchens or dwellings where they would cook for their family. But they absolutely like needed like groceries and food to be able to cook with, because, you know, the work in the fields is really paid pretty poorly. And so anyways, so we were able to start like a food distribution. And so that was among the first things we started. And then there was this need to, you know, people were wanting to learn English. And so we started an ESL program. And then people were telling us that there was sort of like a community clinic, but even to go to it, though it was a sliding fee scale, when you don't have $30, you don't have $30. And so they couldn't go to the, you know, doctors. And did we have any doctors that would be willing to help? And there was a doctor at the time who said, you know what, I'd love to do a once a week clinic. So we started a weekly clinic, and we started a clothes distribution program. And then each of these things opened us up to what we were really wanting. And our deepest desire was to create a place for relationships. So the deepening of relationships happened. And as we over the years have experienced it, is that we see that it's almost like a sacramental experience that we've had, from literally births and baptisms and, you know, first communions and rites of passage and marriages and divorces and deaths, you know, sort of like the lifespan of our lives in a small community. And it's been most incredible as I've seen just my own transformation and growing in an understanding of God, and of course Jesus within the context of the suffering poor, and to that end, I feel like my own spiritual journey has just multiplied tenfold, and it's one that continues to happen sort of daily, as we try to enter into our reality on a day-by-day basis as the needs come each day, So that's in regards to the works of mercy, but we also are about 20 miles from Vandenberg Air Force Base. Who knew? And, Vandenberg is really the place where the missileers are trained in all weapons that are ICBMs. And so we from Guadalupe see and feel and hear the shaking of the house as the ICBMs are tested that then land in the Marshall Islands. And so the aspect of resistance for us is having us go to Vandenberg for monthly vigils, but then also on, bigger days like Hiroshima, like January 22nd for the ICANN vigils, and other times to really witness to the ill-spent money on weapons, and especially weapons of mass destruction, and the robbing of the poor in spending the millions on that, multi-millions on that, instead of on the needs that we see daily.
So doing this kind of work, both with the relationships and hospitality, but then also this witness and vigiling, they can't really go unnoticed in a town of 8,000. What is the dynamic like in doing such public work in such a small town?
Yeah. It's really interesting because the community of Guadalupe, so let's see, the community of the people and the people that we serve and are with really don't have a clear sense of who we are and what we do, or why we do it. That's a better way to say it. It's like they trust us implicitly, but they can't quite see like the bigger picture and don't understand at all the Catholic worker movement. What I think they understand is that and live, and it's a mutualness, is a trust, so that when Dennis risked arrest and then was jailed for 4 months at Metropolitan Detention Center, we told the community of what we were doing and why we were doing it and the consequences of it. And it was really interesting because like nuclear weapons are not at all on the radar of farm workers. But what is on their radar are two things. And one is speaking truth to power. So however that is. And the second is, of course, the experience of incarceration. And so when Dennis was in prison for the 4 months, I had people literally coming to me daily with plates of food, with, prayer vigils, with anything and everything I needed, because they understood what it meant to have a loved one in prison. And I felt like that was one more way to connect with the community, because they now were able to say, we identify with you in a sense of having a loved one in prison. And so in that aspect, we almost feel like our lives in service in the community is very holistic. The aspect of resistance and all of that are things that maybe they don't relate with as much, but they respect us in doing it as we do it. That's a great question, though.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more of like what does the life and work of that community in Guadalupe look like generally? I had never heard of Guadalupe, California until I was at the LA Worker.
Right.
But then one day when I was in St. Louis, I was buying some salad and saw that on the back that it was grown in Guadalupe. And so
Right.
there's probably other folks out there right now eating lettuce, eating a salad that was grown in your community there in Guadalupe.
Right. Yeah. So Guadalupe is almost an island, because on one end of it, on the western end of it, is literally the Pacific Ocean, and then on the north, east, and south of it, it's surrounded by fields where strawberry, lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower is grown. And I think I heard that, California provides over 50% of the produce that is used, maybe even 70% of the produce that is used in the US. So, and a large chunk of that happens on the Central Coast because the weather is so favorable. And so the people that live in Guadalupe are the harvesters of those fruits and vegetables. And there has been, in just the years that we've been here, a growth in the production of strawberries, in the harvesting of strawberries, because that is actually where more money is made by the people that own the land. And so because of the increase in the harvest of strawberries, now we've had an increase in the people that come to pick those strawberries tend to be from a particular region of Mexico called Oaxaca. And that is a region of mostly indigenous Mexicans whose language is Mixteco, and Spanish would be their sometimes second language. Many people are now arriving who don't even speak Spanish. And typically, the Oaxacan farm worker is generally sort of shorter, and so they are the ones that are used to harvest the strawberries, because strawberry harvesting is literally bent over all day long, picking the strawberries. And so typically it's the Oaxacans that tend to do that job. So there's a growing number of Oaxacan field workers who are now living in Guadalupe, but we also have a community of Salvadorans who also fled the Civil War back in the 80s and 90s, and they tend to be the ones who pick the lettuce and the cabbage. And then you have the sort of general Mexican that would be north of Oaxaca, who would be the ones picking the broccoli and celery. That's also picked here. And most of the folks that we serve, I would say up to 90% of the folks we serve are undocumented. So they would have crossed in very, very difficult, and I say traumatic experiences. Often, as we've heard, the stories in the, semi-trailers packed like sardines, in, really horrible conditions, crossing the desert, drinking from the troughs that the animals drink from, that they've come across, and that they would filter the water from these troughs to drink because they didn't have enough water to drink themselves. Just very, very difficult conditions, horrible conditions, traumatic conditions, that they're here so that in many cases they can work enough to just sort of subsist here so that they can send whatever extra money back home to support families, many times children, but sometimes parents, in the dire conditions that they have left in wherever they're from, Mexico or Salvador. Yeah.
You all do a health clinic there. Do you see like the results of that, like very difficult work coming into your clinic?
Right. That's a great question, Theo. So, yeah. So initially we started the clinic as sort of like this acute, problems, if it was, muscle strains or infections or so forth. And over the years, we've seen the need for, and have been able, thank God, to address sort of the accumulative stress that happens in the lives of people who've lived such, stressful lives, traumatic lives. And so we now are able to treat and see quite a bit of, sort of like the mental illness that happens with, PTSD and, depression and anxiety and all of those things that we see, and the way those things then affect the body in the way of, diabetes and hypertension and heart disease and so forth. And so we are able to, though it's literally a drop in the bucket, address some of these issues with the excellent doctors who come, and we're able to, buy a lot of the medications that we're able to give, but then also we have a lot of over-the-counter medications that we can give. And then over the years, though not specifically right now, we've been able to offer, acupuncture and massage and different things just to try and really address some of the, stress-induced medical issues that happen.
So you all have been doing this for quite some time. I think you had said 27 years. What do you find it is that keeps you going, that has allowed this to be something that you've been able to dedicate your life towards?
So when we came, Dennis and I had said that, we were going to give it 5 years. If it was easy, hard, or anything in between, we were committed for 5 years, because as we know, in Catholic worker especially starting anything, it can be very, very difficult, you know, and we didn't want to be led by the immediate sort of emotional experience of things. And so we really wanted to give it some time. And it's really been over the years that we found that, oh, this is the place where we've been called. And it's really been the community that has sustained us. And there's hardly a day that passes that we don't have somebody from the community bringing us food, which is their way of saying thank you. Or certainly our supporters who just miraculously continue to donate so that the work can continue, you know, and we really have seen it as this is the way God has shown us that this is the way we are to walk, you know, almost like one step at a time. And our work is humble in that, you know, we don't serve the hundreds of thousands, or hundreds anyways, like they of course do in LA or in other major cities. But it's really wonderful to be able to, in our food distribution program, know almost every person that's there, and their story and their struggle and their kids. And, you know, it's a relational thing that was really what we were wanting from the very beginning. And over the years, and that's the thing with relationship, is that there's a time element there, you know. There's something about knowing somebody for a little bit, but then knowing somebody for a longer stretch really has you have an inner experience of their lives and their dreams and their hopes and their struggles. And it's deeper, you know, it's a deeper experience of what it means to serve.
So, what advice would you give to younger folks thinking about making this a life? Are there any important practices or anything you would really recommend?
Tagore was somebody that I was reading back in high school, and he's an Indian poet, novelist, and he said something that I've just have held so deeply all these years. And he said, "Let the beauty you love be what you do." And I feel like it's something that Dorothy could have said as well, or that kind of said the duty of delight, because I just think it's so important to give our lives to our deepest yearnings, you know, and to do it with this idea of, you know, you have your yearning, and then as it's being lived, that it then almost transforms itself, almost as like in art or poetry or dance, you know, that it's your life, that you kind of like have this place that you start, and then in the doing, it transforms itself into what it needs to be, you know. And I think that joining our lives with those who have less, but not only less economically, but who don't have sort of the privilege of status or class or family or any of that, that they really, really, really live on the grace of God. And so you know, seeing that and being so moved by that and realizing like, oh, that's all of us. But I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that we have more control or say about our lives than we do, you know. And here the poor are again like showing us we, all of us, rely on the grace of God day by day in whatever we do. And certainly the community has echoed that again. It echoes that daily, really, for me as I'm with it. Yeah.
Any things that we haven't hit on yet that you feel would be important to share?
I think that, you know, the Catholic worker has so many, and it's one of the things that I love so much about it is this idea of personalism, you know. And so the Catholic worker is not, and Dorothy said, it's not an institution, you know, it's a movement. And so as a movement, there's, for me, the strongest idea of the Catholic worker is this idea of personalism. And so, you know, how is it lived in each one of us? Not necessarily from a house or even in a community. I mean, though community is what nourishes us or can nourish us, but it's, you know, how do you live it on a day-to-day basis? And how is that a part of your everyday life? Um, and and so for me, it really is like the expression of the first communities after Jesus died, you know. They, as I see it, they were Catholic workers, you know. They lived day to day on where and how the Spirit was moving and who was coming to them and how they could heal and how they could serve and how they could live with one another. And all of that is the Catholic worker at its finest. And how do we come back to that on a, you know, daily basis in our lives, but then, you know, touch on it as we, you know, Theo, have our sister house gatherings or the Midwest gathering or the, you know, PLC or the ALC, or, you know, just these ways of coming together again and renewing ourselves and then going back into the work and going back into the place where Jesus lived, you know, was with the people, was with the day to day as he was going from one place to another, and things were happening and people were coming to him. And God, isn't that the life of a Catholic worker, day by day, and who comes to the door and who knocks on the door? And sometimes it's so difficult, and it's when we need one another. And sometimes it's so life giving, and it's when we're able to give at our best, you know, and not from us, but through us.
Well, thanks again so much for being willing to take the time and talk to us, Tensie.
You guys are so patient. Thank you.
So we want to thank Tensie so much for joining us and sharing her experience and a little bit about what it's like to be in Beatitude House in Guadalupe. We really appreciate the time that people take to bring their stories to share with all of you all.
I've never lived in a town as small as 8,000 before, let alone been like the infamous Catholic worker people in that small of a town. I'm glad Tensie was able to share her perspective on it all with us.
It is interesting. I think that sometimes with the Catholic worker, there's so much focus about on houses that are in the big cities that we sometimes forget about the important work that needs to be done in small towns and rural areas and everywhere in between.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about the Catholic worker is that decentralized look around where you are and try and fill the needs where you see them in your own place. It sounded like they were very intentional about that when they were starting out too.
Hmm. Yeah. I would imagine that there is also a piece about being in a small town that, for better or worse, does hold this sort of piece of accountability of if you start saying that you're holding to these Catholic worker principles, people will see if you're consistently living them or not. That's both like a huge opportunity for witness and quite some pressure all at the same time.
Yeah, there's no anonymity in that small town, which was also, very much a good thing. Tensie was talking about, she knows almost everyone who comes there and their stories and their struggles, and is able to like really be in relationship in that community. It sounds.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think about in Chicago, we have enough trouble trying to know half of the names of neighbors on the block. Uh, Bit of a different dynamic for sure.
Yeah, and I think of, you asked that question of what's it like being the protester, nuke people also in town, something Tenzi said is not on a lot of folks' radar around there. Yeah, it's hard to imagine being in that position. And she asked kind of, or I guess she thought more like maybe folks don't really understand what is the Catholic worker, what is happening at the Catholic worker. Um, and I don't know that I don't think that that's like unique to them at Guadalupe. What is the Catholic worker to just the average person? It'd be interesting to like just survey folks adjacent to the Catholic worker, but not like fully deep in it, like the folks we talked to on the show here.
I would say it would be interesting even to get the responses of folks who stay in Catholic workers for hospitality or who come through soup kitchens. I know one guest we've had who he had stayed with us several times and was trying to like figure out like what is this, and someone was trying to explain it to him, and all of a sudden he was like, "Oh, you're like a group home." And like it was like this moment of obviousness of like, well, duh, like that makes sense. Why didn't you just say that to begin with? And we are like, sure, that's close enough, that works.
Yeah, it's funny having those interactions with folks because I've also had people be like, "Oh, so you're like a bunch of like brothers or nuns or something like that too," and it's like, well, not really, but I guess if that's the closest thing you can get in your mind, we'll just leave it there for now.
Well, I guess that sort of points to the marketing problem or PR problem that the Catholic worker can sometimes has. Perhaps this podcast. I don't know that this podcast clarifies any better of like what the Catholic worker is, but at least gives some people some examples of different people's interpretation of it. That wraps up another episode of Coffee with Catholic Workers. If you want to reach out to us with any comments, suggestions, clarification of thought, etc., you can email us at coffeewithcatholicworkers@gmail.com. We want to thank Chris from the Bloomington Catholic Worker for help with editing, David Hayes for our music, and Becky McIntyre for our graphics.
Thanks again for joining us for some clarification of thought. We hope today's conversation has been enlightening and maybe even that you're encouraged to go out and help build a world where it's easier to be good.